Hello and welcome to the Civil Service Heads Together podcast, a product of the Civil Service Future Leaders programme, where two civil servants meet virtually and converse about their own experiences. We are passionate about well-being and mental health, and we recognise that talking about it can really help, particularly during a global pandemic. We hope you enjoy the podcast.
Hi and welcome to today's Heads Together podcast. I'm Jeff, and on today's show we have Sharon.
Hello.
And Martin.
Hello.
Martin, could you tell the listeners a little bit about yourself?
Hello. My name is Martin Glanicki. I'm currently working with the Ministry of Defence and was formerly with the Home Office. I was born in Yorkshire, the sixth child, the youngest child of a family, and my father was a Polish soldier that came across after the Second World War. And like many of the Poles that came across at that time, if the mother came with them, then the offspring tended to speak the Polish language. But if it was just the father, and they, like my father, married a British woman, then the children tended not to speak any Polish. So I don't speak any Polish and can't understand it. I'm married to Sue for over 30 years now, and I was in the army for over 30 years too. I've got two sons, both of them are serving in the Royal Navy at the moment, and I've got one grandson aged 9 months. As I said, I recently moved from the Home Office to the Ministry of Defence, and I've been a civil servant now for just under 3 years, having left the armed forces. Although I've clearly been around the MOD civil servants in my former job as a soldier. I love sports, and I'm a very keen lifelong learner. I completed my Doctor of Philosophy in December of 2019. I also have a very strong faith, and I'm the treasurer of my church and a member of the parochial church council. That's me.
That's great. Now, Sharon, tell us about yourself.
Hello, I'm Sharon Manton. I work for the Department of Work and Pensions. I've worked there for 3 years. I was formerly 22 years at HMRC, but please don't hold that against me. I am a member of this podcast team, the Heads Together podcast team. Hobbies, I don't have an awful lot at the moment, apart from going on holiday, running, and just generally socialising if I can.
That's great. So, Martin, what made you join the civil service in the first place?
Well, I was just leaving the armed forces. I'd come up to and done my time there, and I think it was part and parcel of a desire for service and to continue serving the country and serving people. During my time in the army, I began to appreciate actually just how wonderful and how fortunate we were in the UK, and I recognised at that time just how well the United Kingdom had integrated my father and given him the opportunities, and like many other people that had come from abroad. I mean, I look back on that time and reflect on the end of the Second World War when, while the UK was victorious, it was pretty much broken, certainly financially. There was rationing for many a year afterwards. And yet the country still had the wherewithal to accept and allow and welcome many foreigners, including my father. And I think that's a tremendous attribute of what you might call Britishness. And so most of my colleagues at the time, because of the skills that I'd learned in the armed forces and as an engineer, were moving into defense industry or other areas where former officers like myself moved sort of leadership business roles, maybe the bursar of a school or into leading charities and so on. But I actually wanted to continue some form of service like that, and the civil service really I thought was the right match. And then the opportunities came up in the Home Office in areas that were managing many people, which sounded quite thrilling. So less of the engineering aspects of what I'd done before, but more of the leadership and management requirements of what I'd done before. And so it wasn't for those reasons that some people join the civil service, which is, I think, rightly for stability, and a reasonable pension and a good and challenging, worthwhile career. Mine was very much for service, and to provide a sort of a very positive attitude and attribute for the civil service.
Great. And the same question to you, Sharon. Why did you join the civil service?
Mine was a 3-month contract 25 years ago. I was 20 years old. I needed to find something to do. Had no idea what career I was ever going to take. I needed to find something. A friend of mine, of my family, worked at HMRC. Said they had some 3-month contracts there, so I applied, got the job. Then they extended that for 6 months, and 24 years later, I'm still here. And there's something there for everybody. There's a job out there in any of these civil service government departments for us all, and we can all move through them as well. So I've moved from HMRC to DWP. We've got the Land Registry, we've got the Military Defence. There's lots of them out there we can all go to. So if that's what I would tell my 20-year-old self now about why you could get a job, or you could get a job within the civil service.
Martin, you've got quite the demanding role. Tell us a bit about it.
Yeah, I mean, it's very difficult. It's more difficult than normal because I joined this current role at the beginning of January, and I would have joined, if I'd joined this time last year, we wouldn't have had the COVID experience. And so the demands are really that I work in a very highly classified area and therefore must attend work day in, day out, to use those classified terminals, because the area that I work in has very sensitive information. And so that's really been the biggest challenge, to maintain the desire and the rightful needs of government to keep everyone working from home as much as possible. But that's not practical when you're dealing either in an operational area, classically like the police or the immigration enforcement or border force or someone like that in the Home Office, or soldiers, or if you're dealing as I am, with classified areas. So that's been the biggest, I think, challenge in working in just this very short space of time in my new role.
So how do you look after your own well-being in this sort of situation?
I tend to look on my past and take great strength from either what I've experienced or what I've heard about other people close to me experience, or what I've read, and I tend to go with the evidence, technical, and in the case of COVID, the scientific evidence. And I think generally, I would say to myself that my experience in the army as a bomb disposal officer has built an element of resilience in me, both physical resilience, particularly having seen colleagues go through life-changing injuries, what you might call psychological or emotional resilience, such as watching colleagues either lose their lives and their families devastated by that, or watching them have life-changing injuries, and then having also been responsible for licensing some of those people to go out to places like Iraq and Afghanistan and operate as a bomb disposal officer. And so that plays on one's mind very heavily. And so the resilience is born out of appreciating that the training and the application and the testing and the selection processes to become something like that or another trade are very rigorous, and that no one will be allowed to go into and operate in that environment unless they had been selected, psychologically tested, very highly trained, and then having passed a very demanding course, and then mentored to make sure that they were suitable before they go. But I suppose for myself as well, this is a personal thing because I have a very strong faith. There's a spiritual resilience that I need, and I get that from my own personal faith and my own church community. As I said earlier, I'm the treasurer of my own church, and on the parochial church council, and have been on previous churches that I've been in now for many years since I became a Christian. So I think I get a lot of that strength to be resilient and to accept my fate, and actually to be grateful and thankful that I'm still in work, as is my wife, as are my two sons, whereas my youngest sister is no longer working because of the effects of COVID. And I look at many colleagues who are no longer working, and many colleagues who are suffering either from my old world in the armed forces, or in this new world now of struggling with either furlough or with challenges of not being able to go out and having children with them to teach and so on. So I'm sort of grateful for that, I suppose, and therefore I try through my own church to try and help out as much as I possibly can with those people that are less fortunate than I am at this moment in time.
My partner is ex-paratroop regiment,
Right.
and he's very resilient to a lot of things. He's very black and white. Everything's very, but I think that's how it's inbred in him as a paratrooper.
Yeah.
That you just get on with it and you fight. And I think he would turn he was the other way, that he just has to get on with things. He's seen all the things that you mention.
Yeah.
He's spoken very little about some of the things that you've mentioned because, and I wonder whether or not would it be better for him if he did talk about some of the things that he'd seen and in Northern Ireland, and friends, he lost friends to different things, lifelong injuries, which then, because of those injuries, he's then see his friends take their own lives because of those injuries. It's just difficult for me to understand how to help him, even though he doesn't think he needs help, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think it does. And I co-lead a small initiative within the bomb disposal community, which helps people just like that. And I think what we have is we have people across the spectrum. So very brave, very courageous soldiers and former soldiers who have succumbed to mental injury or mental illness. And perhaps we're better now in that we offer the opportunity for people to come forward and talk about it so that we can try and make and understand their individual situation. But I also think there's a point whereby some people, and your husband may be one of them, whereby actually the prognosis is to do exactly what they're doing. Very, very much like I suspect many of the post First and Second World War veterans did, where you had a community of people who were all in a similar situation, which was actually the baseline from where to start and move forward, and accept that what had gone in the past had gone in the past, and that we'd all had a similar experience, and now we were happier to move on. So there was no need to share that because many had experienced that, because we were at war, total war. I think in the more recent times, and perhaps this is where it's important for the civil service as well, is that everyone has a different threshold to what they feel, see, and happens to them. And it could be a threshold that is broken, which wouldn't have been broken at a different time, even with the same atmospherics around. And so it is a case, I think, of taking each individual case on its merit. But the fact is that for some people, there's a great phrase now. It's okay not to be okay, and that's right. But it's also okay if for you the best thing is not to talk about it.
Okay. Yeah.
Because I'm sure we'll find that if we say to someone, "Please tell me about that," that will release demons, but potentially. And so I think it is a case of, and you'll be the best person because apart from God, you know your husband better than anyone apart from himself and God.
Mm.
And so you're the best person to make that judgment, because all of us will, we I think, play an outward view to people, which is we want people to believe this, but inside this is happening. And the closest person to get that physically is their partner.
Right.
People like yourself, I would argue. And so if it's the right time for him to talk to you about it, if you feel he has got a concern with that, then you can ask the question. My advice to you would be, but don't push it.
Mm.
Because for him, it might be the case that because I was a paratrooper, this is how I deal with it. And what you might not know, and this is not because he's not telling you, is that within his regimental system, and the old regimental system that we all have if we're ex-military, is a band of brothers that talk to each other anyway. And I think that's a little bit like communities within the civil service that are perhaps the more operational. So if you're working with teams, you're much more prepared to talk to those people more closely. And I think with us all having to work from home now, that might be a greater challenge for us within this sort of environment, because we're not having those coffee conversations and those water stop conversations just to ask people how they are. Because it is very different when you ask someone, how are you? And you're at a coffee stall with them, to when you're perhaps on a Zoom where, to keep the bandwidth down, you're not actually having the faces up either. That's much more difficult. But I think in my experience in both the Home Office and more recently here, there is a lot of work being done, and this is another great example where we as people are trying to reach out. And so in my previous role in the Home Office, where I managed about 180 staff, right down at each level, a manager who managed, say, 10 to 12 people would weekly be in contact with anyone that's working from home, just finding out if they're okay, making sure that we're providing anything that they need to work from home, or if they weren't working from home for whatever reason, or if they had COVID or something like that, that we were giving as much support that we could, that they knew about trims, they knew about EAP, they knew about operational health, and so on and so forth. So I think we've done as in my experience, we've done as well as we can in that area.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
I think, like you said, there's that band of brothers, which is ex-military sort of talk, and the trust you have in each other.
Yeah.
In the other world, you may not feel that trust with the people around you, and that isn't just because they haven't got your back, but it also could be that trust, the conversations.
Yes, and I think as a civil servant, having seen both sides now, most people who are in the civil service are much more wanting of their own personal space. So they wouldn't want, because they've not grown up in it, that sort of military banter, togetherness, tell everything all the time. And I think that so neither of those are right or wrong. It's just that's the way that we are. But I think there's enough within the civil service for people also, because it's not just a management thing. It's about people everywhere saying, I have a social responsibility and a responsibility as a civil servant in a working environment whereby I'm well looked after and I'm respected, to ask out about other people, just to find out if they're okay, just to give them a call, because there's nothing more powerful than someone calling you up out of the blue and asking you if you're okay from your workforce. Nothing more powerful. And it might only be a minute, 5 minutes chatting, but there is really nothing more powerful than someone calling up.
Yeah, thank you.
Martin, in your work on bomb disposal, you must have faced considerable pressures. How did you cope with that?
The most challenging things clearly are dealing with deaths when you're in the armed forces, deaths in your own regiment or your own organisation. I suppose, having been a commanding officer as well, it's speaking to either the mother or the spouse of someone that's died. And what that teaches you is to be very humble and to be very thoughtful in what you say and to be very caring. And in that world, we do remain a community well after, which is why we're called veterans, and we stick together. I think what I try to do with that experience is to bring the best parts of it into the way that I work in the civil service as well. And what I mean by that is it's being honest with people. And so with a recent recruiting situation I was in, a person had been selected, but they weren't quite sure whether they wanted to take that role or not. And so I had the view that I had to explain to them that while in the future, for many roles, we've learned how to work from home. And so I suspect that going forward, there'll be a number of civil service appointments that can be done more from home, if not totally from home, than was in the past. There will clearly be other jobs in the civil service, more operational type ones, or ones where you have to work on classified material, whereby that won't be the case. And so I had to explain to that person that that was the case in this role. And they actually wrote back to me and said, thank you for being upfront and honest about that. That wasn't their thoughts on the application form that they were given, which is in that sort of standard civil service format. But it was really helpful that I'd been upfront and honest with them. And the benefit of was that they said, and I'm now going to sign up to fulfill that role. And so I think that's the sort of experience that I've taken from the past that is beneficial in my current role and my current work as a civil servant. And it goes back really to two of the civil service values of honesty and integrity. And bad news or less than satisfactory news is never enjoyable, but in the end, it is always the best. And that's the experience that I've found in my career.
Thanks. Sharon, the most high-profile cause of stress at the moment is, of course, COVID. You've had first-hand experience on that front. Tell us about that.
Well, if I first talk about, obviously, we've at the Department of Work and Pensions we had the struggle 12 months ago of ensuring vulnerable people were paid and people had the money they needed to carry on. However, because of that way we had to do things, there was a little bit of a process now and check it later. We're unfortunate that later is now. So we're at the later stage. So we're now picking up where other people try to cheat the system and ruin the system in a really, which I find is bad enough in itself in a normal environment. But for people to try and do these things to a system, to the benefit system during a pandemic, when there really are people out there struggling that have never struggled really before financially. And we know that finances are one of in the triangle of life, the things we all rely on, of resilience, the things we need, love, food, shelter, and for our money, and to know that we're safe and secure is one of those things that we rely on for our well-being. And a lot of these people, not knowing that where the next penny was coming from, was probably affecting their mental health as well. So it's important for us to ensure we did get the money out to people we needed to, and we just had to understand that some people out there were going to take what they could when they didn't need to. So that was what my experience from a working point of view. However, from a personal point of view, I would have to say that it was scary. It was, I didn't have any symptoms. That's the first thing about this, which is quite scary, is I didn't actually have any of the symptoms until about 3 days later after I got the cold. So I said, I didn't have the cough, I didn't have the temperature, I had my taste and my smell. I had a cold, what I thought was a cold. My legs were aching, I had a headache. It was a cold type symptoms. So I just carried on, paracetamol, Nurofen, feeling sorry for myself, bit of telly. A couple of days later, I noticed that I didn't have any smell or taste. And then that got scary because it was very quickly. I did the little NHS online test. It said, yes, you need to go for a test. Please book one. Whereas we all wanted these things to happen very quickly, and it did, but it's really scary because I was trying to book an appointment at 5:15, and they had an appointment available for me at 5 o'clock. Obviously, I wasn't able to get to this test centre in 15 minutes, so I booked 5:31. So I had 45 minutes to get my head around the fact that I was off of this pandemic of this world that I was going to be part of, that I thought would never be me. It's never going to happen to me. And it was one of the nights just before Christmas, absolutely pouring with rain. I was driving by myself, as you do, down to this test centre. I drove down the road, and to my left I could see all the floodlights where they'd taken at this test centre on a car boot sale ground. So it was a massive area. So I could see all the floodlights, pouring with rain, and I just burst into tears because it then dawned on me that there's not only these poor people working round the clock in conditions like this, here I was potentially going to be having a positive result from something. And it just emotionally, it got to me at that point, not just because of myself, but because of these people that were working so hard to ensure that I could be there within 15 minutes or 45 minutes or whatever time was convenient to me at that point. And then waiting the 6 days over Christmas, which was a nightmare because I had to wait because my son, who's so this is where other things affect other people. My partner was fine, he was okay because he was off work anyway, but my son, who is on a 0-hour contract, couldn't go to work. So there was me thinking, I haven't got it. My poor son's losing out on money because he can't go to work. 6 days later, I get my positive result. So in a way, his time away from work was okay. It was needed. And then it was just a case of what next? And what's going to happen to me next? Do I have to wait to have another test done? Do I have obviously my son and my partner still have to self-isolate? But what's going to happen to me? What happens to me next? I still haven't got any taste or smell. About 4 days after, maybe 5 days after, when I thought, okay, I've got away with this quite lightly, I then started having breathing problems. During all of this, I also had to have the tooth extraction. So at the end of my isolation period, I then got in contact with my dentist and was able to have a tooth extraction. But it scared me because it was the first time I'd been out and I had to walk somewhere. And when I got to the top of these steps, I couldn't breathe. And that's what scared me the most again, because I do, as I've mentioned before, I do run as a hobby. Not very far, not very fast, but the odd half marathon at 2 hours 20, 2 hours 30. I couldn't walk to the top of the stairs and I was gasping for breath. And I thought, this has scared me now, again, for a different reason. So I had the extraction, and when I could finally talk, I got in contact with my local doctors, who then got me to go straight away down to my local COVID clinic, because one of the doctors near us is a COVID only clinic. They tested my oxygen levels, they tested my breathing, they had a look at all different, tested my heart, blood pressure, etc. And then asked me to go to the hospital the next day to go and get some oxygen and to take this machine with me to keep measuring my oxygen levels. I've got to say, I did feel like I was something like a Monsters Inc. when I was at the doctor's surgery, because all the people around me were masked up, covered up, face masks. And I felt like in a minute someone's going to come and get a litter picker and pick something up from me and drop me off somewhere. Still, breathing isn't great. It isn't brilliant, but I still feel very lucky that I'm able to be at work a month after being having my positive result. But I'm at work, working full time still, but just taking it easy. So I do feel that I'm very lucky in that manner.
And was there anything in particular that you did to help you relax and clear your mind during this period?
Well, funnily enough, podcasts and things like this. Yeah, because telly was telly. You know, we could play games with as a family, as a group of people. But sometimes, as Martin's mentioned, we just want time on our own. We just want that little bit of a breathing space, just that bit of time to yourself. So I do actually like reading. So I'd go upstairs and lie down and read. But I can't tell how many times the Kindle ended up smacking me in the face because I fell asleep and it dropped in my face, or it dropped on the floor and it woke me up. And like I needed that bit of rest. My body obviously needed that rest, so that reading helped me to get that rest. But then I was woken up with the Kindle in my nose. So I then discovered audiobooks. But then I then got to a point where I couldn't actually. I'd have to remember where I'd left it, where I fell asleep, and it was like what it was I listened to. So I needed something that I could jump in and out of, something that would make me laugh, something that would be something of nothing really. I just needed to hear. I didn't want to listen to feel good stories. I didn't want to listen to how to help me stories. I just wanted to listen to stories. So I just found podcasts that talked about everything but nothing in particular. Usually it was a celebrity podcast, them talking about themselves. Most recently it's been, whether or not we can say exactly who, but the Chris Ramsey and Rosie Ramsey one was my favourite, because they would talk about their lives as children. They would then go on about talking about remembering an ice cream they might have had. They would then discuss something that their son, who was like 3 or 4 months old, had done. And the whole 25 minutes of this podcast, they couldn't tell you what it was about. It was about everything. And that's what I found really helpful for me, because it chilled me, it relaxed me. And it was the effect when we like to listen to about other people's lives, and whether they've been better on than ours or worse than ours, or we could reflect on what they've said, really helped me get through my sort of 4 weeks of doing nothing.
Martin, with all the experiences you've had over the years, are you glad you're in the civil service?
Oh yes, undoubtedly, yeah, without a doubt, and I think that's the case because, and you know, I wouldn't be so naive to say that with a civil service of whatever it is, 460,000 people, there aren't some people that probably don't deserve to be in the civil service and are not serving the community well. But the vast majority of civil servants that I come across day in, day out are doing a great job, a courageous job in trying to deliver the service that the country asks them to do. And it's tough at times. It's particularly tough if you're on the sort of coalface, you know, at a centre, HMRC or Department of Work and Pensions, or some of the operational areas like immigration enforcement and border force in the Home Office. To keep, you know, explain to people when they're sort of shouting at you or don't believe that you're trying to provide the best service for them. But I think overall, we're still a very highly respected civil service across the world, and I'd like to think that we will continue to strive to be world leading as public servants.
And Sharon, what message do you have for our fellow civil servants?
Well done for a start. Well done for everybody that's been able to keep continuing with whatever role within the government department they're in. Take on board what the civil service has got to offer you. All of the support mechanisms that are out there, take them on board. And away from it personally, I would say look after yourself, because we can do a lot within our job to ensure everyone else around us, our colleagues, claimants in my situation, are all getting what they need. But what do you need? Can you look after yourself as well? I wasn't invincible I got it, and I thought, never me. It would never happen to me, as I said earlier. So I would just say to people, take on board what the civil service has got to offer you, look after yourself, and thanks all the departments for all the work we've all been doing to keep the country going.
Well, that was excellent. Thanks very much to our guests, Martin and Sharon. I've been Jeff. This has been the Civil Service Heads Together podcast. Thanks for listening.